Hello there! How can you create a tic-tac-toe game in Java? If you are watching this, my guess is that you are learning to program in Java and you are looking for small projects to practice. Programming a tic-tac-toe is a great way to practice and improve your problem-solving skills. In this video, I will show you how you can create a tic-tac-toe game, console-based. That means that we will interact with the game through the console. Here is the game we are going to build. First, we will display the board, where every cell has an identifier. The way this works is, for instance, if you want to place an X in the middle, then you will enter position number 5. Or if you want to place an X in the top right corner, you will enter 3, and so on. You will place your X, and then the machine will play a circle automatically and ask the user to enter another X. And the game will end when someone wins or the board is full. That's how our game is going to work. So let's dive in and see how we can write the code. We will create 3 different classes that will have different responsibilities. This will help us to organize the code in a logical way and to break the main problem into smaller problems. Before we start, there are some things we should consider. First thing is how we are going to represent the game board. The board is basically a 3x3 matrix where the cells can have 3 different states. The cell could be empty, it could contain an X, or it could contain a circle. So to represent the 3 states, we will use 3 numbers. 0, that means empty, 1 to represent X, and 2 to represent the circle. So we are going to use integers to represent each of the cells, and then a 2D array of integers to represent the board. A 2D array can be understood as an array of arrays, so we will have 3 arrays with 3 cells each. As I mentioned before, I will organize the code in 3 classes. One of the classes will be the board, and this class will contain the code to manipulate the matrix. Then we will create another class, Game Resolver, which will contain the code to check if someone won. In other words, if there are 3 symbols which are consecutive. And finally, we will have a tic-tac-toe game class, which will contain the main method, meaning that it will be the entry point of our program. And it will also coordinate the other 2 classes. Perfect, so let's start to write our classes. So I will create a class called board, and I will add our array of arrays, which will represent the state of the game board. So it will be private int, square brackets, and I will call this field board. And create the array with new int and pass the size. Remember we said at the start that we will print out the matrix with identifiers or a number in each cell? I call this the instruction matrix. We are going to need a method to display this matrix. So let's call this method display instruction board. And we will use systemoutprintln, and we are going to use bars and hyphens symbols to draw the lines of the board. Perfect, this will be our instruction board to display at the start. Now next we are going to create a method to display the real state of the board. So I'm going to call this method displayBoard, and the return type is void since it doesn't need to return anything, and it will just print stuff. So here first we need to display a line. So I will print bar, hyphen, and so on. Now this bit is a bit more complicated because I need to access the array and display X or circle or empty depending on what the cell contains. If the cell is a 0, it will be empty. 1 means displaying an X and 2 means displaying a circle. So because this logic is a bit more complex and I will need to repeat it 3 times for every row, I'm going to create a method called displayRow, and I will pass as arguments the row that I want to print. And this function will return the string that we want to print. So I'm going to leave this method empty for now, and I'm going to finish the displayBoard method first. So assuming we have a method that returns how the row look like, I will print it, and then I will print a line again, and then I will call the new function to print the row number 1, which will be the second row, and then I will print another line, and then the third row and another line. So okay, so now let's complete the function to display the row. As I said before, I'm going to return a string with how the row will look like. Therefore, I'm going to use a string builder to build this string. The first character in the string is going to be a bar, representing the boundaries of the board. And since I have to print every cell in the row, I'm going to use a loop that will go from 0 to 3, and in each iteration I'm going to access the cell, and if the cell is 0, that means empty, so I will add an empty space to the string. If the cell is 1, that means that we should print X, and if the cell is 2, I will print a circle, and after that I will add a bar to separate each of the cells. And finally, I will call the toString and return the string that I just built. So why did I create this method? The key reason is to avoid duplication. So instead of writing this code 3 times for every row, I extracted the code in a method. This is a really good practice and it will help you to avoid duplication in your code. Awesome, so we added a method in our board class that will display the board. Also, we are gonna need to be able to place an X or a circle in the board in a position that is given by the user. So if the user, for instance, enter position 1, we should place an X at the top left corner of the board, which is position 0, 0. So let's create another method to do this. So I'm going to call the method placePiece, and it's going to have 2 parameters. One of them is going to be an integer called position, which is the position where we want to place our X or the circle, and a string to indicate if we are placing an X or we are placing a circle. And we will return a boolean indicating if we were able to place the game piece. So we need to do 2 things here. First, given the position, we need to work out the row and the column where the X or the circle is gonna go. And second thing, once we know the row and the column, we need to update the 2D array. I will advise you to pause the video here and try to write the code yourself before you check out the solution. So, okay, to work out the row, we will do the position minus 1 and then divided by 3, which is the total number of rows. To work out the column, the formula is the position minus the product of row multiplied by 3, all minus 1. So we have now the row and the column where we want to place our game piece. And one thing to consider here is that we can only place a piece if the cell is empty. So we will say if board for a given row and column is equal 0, that means that the cell is empty. So I will update the matrix and then return true. Otherwise, I couldn't place the game piece, so I will return false. And here, we need to consider if we are placing an X, then we will update the cell with number 1. And otherwise, if we are placing a circle, then we will update the cell with number 2. And that's all. We have placed our piece in the board. Now we need to do a very similar thing when it's the machine turn. But instead of using a given position, we will find a place randomly. So let's add another method, and I will call it place piece randomly. And the parameter will be the piece type, which could be an X or it could be a circle. And as before, we will return a boolean to indicate that we were able to update the matrix. The key difference here is that we don't need to work out the row and the column based on a position. We will pick a random column and a random row. Probably you are thinking, so what if the cell is not empty? For that reason, we need to keep trying until we find an empty place, or we make sure that the matrix is not full. In case you want to try to write the function, I will post the video here so you can give it a go. Okay, so first we will pick a random row using the random class, and this will pick a number between 0 and 2. Same to pick the column. So now we have selected a random cell, and we need a variable to indicate that we found a place for our game piece. So I will call this variable was piece placed, and the initial value will be false. Now it could be that the cell that we selected was empty. In that case, we should pick another cell randomly and try again. So we should keep doing this while we couldn't find a place for the piece, and while the matrix is not full. So I will add a while loop, and as a condition I will say while not was piece placed and no matrix is full, and this is a function that I will define in a minute. Okay, so now in each iteration or in each repetition, we will say if the cell is empty and then update our matrix. So to update the matrix means that we will assign number 1 if we were playing an X, and we will assign number 2 if we were playing a circle. So that is what we need to do if we find the cell was empty. If the cell was not empty, we should find another cell. So we will pick another random row and another random column. And then at the end, I will return the was piece place. Now we were talking before about checking if the matrix was full. So we are gonna need a small function to do that. So the function should be called isMatrixFull, and it doesn't need any parameters, and it should return a boolean indicating if there were empty cells in our matrix. So I will pause the video here so you can try to write this function yourself. So here is my solution. As soon as we find one cell is equal to 0, it means that the cell is empty and therefore the matrix is not full since it has a free space. So to do so, we will need to check every row and every column in each row, and if the cell is equal to 0, then I will return false, which means the matrix is not full. Otherwise, if the code went through all the cells and we couldn't find any empty one, it means that the matrix is full, so I will return true. Okay, so far we have write the code to display the board and to place a game piece in a given position. So let's see how we can check if someone won and therefore the game is over. Let's see how we can do this. Try to think the process that you will follow to do this manually. Probably you will go through every cell and then check if there are 3 pieces in line for every possible direction. So we can write this exact mechanism in Java. However, even that seems a bit difficult. So let's try something a bit simpler. Let's check for a given cell if there are 3 pieces in line just for one direction. So for example, let's check if there are 3 pieces in line starting from cell 00. So that will be the top right cell. So since we said at the beginning the code to resolve the game is going to be in a separate class, I'm going to create another class called GameResolver. And I'm going to add a new method called R3PiecesInLine, and this method is gonna take 3 parameters: the board matrix and the row and the column of the starting cell from where I'm gonna start checking. This method will return false if we didn't find 3 pieces of the same type in line from the starting point. So we have the method signature now. So just for an example, let's imagine that the starting point is 00. So first row and first column. And we are going to check if there are 3 consecutive pieces in the down direction, so underneath. So we will check if the cell right below is equal to the current cell, and also if the next one is also equal. So to access the cell that is right below, we need to access the row +1 and the same column. And to access the next cell, we will access the cell that is 2 rows under and in the same column. So now imagine that the starting point is 0, so it will be the second row and the first column. So that will be the right bottom corner. So there is no cell underneath. So that means that we also need to check if we are out of the boundaries of the board. Okay, so let's start writing the code. First, in case the cell is empty, we don't need to continue checking, so we will just return false. Now, what if the cell is not empty? In that case, we need to check if the 2 cells below are out of the board. So, if row +1 is bigger than 2, or if row +2 is bigger than 2, that means that we are out of the board. Now, if the next 2 cells underneath are not outside of the board, then we will check if the value in the current cell is equal to the values in the 2 cells underneath. And if so, I will return true. So this is just for one direction, but we need to do exactly the same thing for the 8 possible directions. So for the down left direction, which is the diagonal, we need to check that the cell which is in the row +1 and column +1, and we also need to check the cell that is in the position row +2 and column +2. To check the right direction, we will need to do the same check for the cell that is in the same row but in column +1 and in column +2. And so forth for all the other directions. So let's write the code for all the directions. And now, in case we check all the directions and we didn't find 3 consecutive pieces, then we will return false. So we have completed this method, so now we are gonna add another method that will use the code that we just wrote. And in this method I will check the matrix to work out if someone won. So there are three possible answers here. No one won yet, so the game is still in progress, or the player that is playing X won, or the player that is playing the circle won. And therefore I'm gonna create an enum called game state, and I'm gonna add three values: in progress, X1, and circle won. And we will call the new method resolve game, and I will pass as parameter the board, and the return type will be the enum that we just created, which is the game state. This method should go through every cell, check if there is 3 consecutive pieces starting from the cell itself, and if so, check if the cell is an X or is a circle, and return who won. And if it couldn't find 3 consecutive cells, then it will return that the game is in progress. So this is what the method should do. So I will advise you that you pause the video here and you try to write the code yourself. Okay, so here we will loop through every row and then every column, and we will call the method we wrote earlier R3 pieces in line to check if there are 3 consecutive equal pieces. If so, if the value of the starting cell is 1, it means that the X won, and if not, it means that the player playing the circle won. And if we didn't find 3 pieces in a row, then we will return in progress. And that's all. We just finished writing a method to resolve the game. So we wrote the code for all the key pieces of functionality that our game should have. Now we need to put all those bits together and get the game working. So let's create another class called tic-tac-toe game and add the main method, which will be the entry point of the game. And the first thing is creating a scanner object so we can read what the user types. And then we will create the board object. And next we will display the instruction board so the user knows how to refer to each of the cells. Next we will read the position the user entered using the nextInt method from the scanner class. Now we will place an X in the position chosen by the user, and the game will be running until someone won or the board is full. Therefore we will need a while loop, and we will add a variable called isGameInProgress to keep track if someone won or not. And we will use the function isFull that we created earlier to check if there is any empty cells in the board. Now, in each iteration, our game will place a circle in a random cell, then display the board again to show the user the state of the game, and then check if someone won using the resolve method from the game resolver class that we created earlier. If the answer is that the game is not in progress, then that means that someone won. It might be the user or it might be the machine. So we will display game over. Otherwise, we will request the user to enter where she or he want to place the next X, and the loop will start again. Alright, we just finished the tic-tac-toe game. You have done an amazing job. Let's run it and see if it works. So I'm going to choose position number 1, and as you can see, the machine chose position 8. So now I will pick position number 7 and the machine pick 5. So I will place the X in number 4 and I won. Alright, so amazing! We reached the end of the tutorial where you learn how to implement a tic-tac-toe game in Java from scratch. You can find the source code in the description. I really hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you in the next one.